Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Community Conversations as we discuss implementing and supporting K-12 virtual learning models. And to do the welcome for the School of Education, I introduce you, Dean Jason Lane.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. Glad to be here. Welcome, everybody, again. This is our 20th community conversation. It's something we started right after the pandemic hit in New York. As we began to quickly shift to remote learning, we wanted to take the opportunity to be able to engage our community in this conversation about remote education and all of its facets. And for those of you who have joined us throughout the 20, know that we've covered a range of topics from how to deal with mental health in the remote space to working with children with special needs in the remote space, that we think about issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. But at the core is understanding the learning process and how do we engage in effective learning through remote education. And so today's is a great panel to be able to help us think through these particular issues. More pressing than ever, obviously, we all grappled with remote education in the spring. As we quickly pivoted, all of us pivoted to remote delivery of education. But here come fall, we're looking at this in a much more, I hope, different and sophisticated way. It's something we in the School of Education have been engaged in for a long time, being one of the top in the country in the delivery of online graduate education across the nation. But we've also, for more than 20 years, offered a master's degree in teaching people how to teach remotely and online. So something that's near and dear to our heart, and delighted to be able to continue this conversation. We also developed, as part of this, a website called remoteed.org, where our faculty, our graduate students knew that it was important to help provide resources to teachers and parents to navigate the space more effectively. In the early days, there was an onslaught of resources that were being made available, and folks were having a difficult time trying to sort through it all. And so this website provides access, links to more than 1,000, I think more than 1,500 resources now that have been vetted by our faculty and graduate students, and it's all organized by grade level and subject matter to help folks quickly identify the resources that might be best needed or best for them in terms of what they're trying to do. Next slide. So next week, I hope you continue with us for the 21st. We're looking at getting back to school. It is hard to believe that it is time for school to begin. The summer is over here at Albany. Classes start next week across the capital region and elsewhere in the country. K-12 schools have already started, or will soon be starting. And so we'll have a great session with our New York State master teachers, talking with them about what they're doing to prepare for the fall semester. And that'll be facilitated by our own Dr. Rory Glass, who is the regional director of the Capital Region New York Master Teacher Program. So hope you turn in next week for that. In addition, we have added a new component for these remote education sessions. These are content filled, and for those of you who are teachers here in New York, we know that you are required to complete your CTLE credits. And so if you are interested in earning CTLE as part of participating in the community conversations, including the one today, I encourage you to reach out to Dr. Jerry Rivera-Wilson. You can see her contact information down there. And so it's a great opportunity to fill out the CTLE credits. So today is a great panel that is really going to draw on the expertise of Cognia and Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute to help us bring national perspectives to bear on conversations we've been having about remote learning. A lot of time we have been spending this summer worried about health and safety of our schools and ensuring that when our children come back to classes, if they do come back to classes, that it's done in a healthy and safe way. I think one of the conversations that we've not heard as much about is learning. How do we make sure learning is occurring effectively? And we know that a number of students are opting for online learning, remote learning come this fall across here in New York. Districts are all making that available for students as an option. In some places, we've seen more than 50% of parents so far opt into remote learning rather than coming into face-to-face instruction as we are trying to figure out how to effectively manage the pandemic. And so for many families and for many teachers, this is going to become a reality very soon once again. And so I'm delighted that we have such expertise here that we can learn from and to have you all share your knowledge with us. So Dan, I think I'm going to turn it over to you to facilitate the conversation. Thank you all for being here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that introduction there, Dr. Lane. My name is Dan Phan, and I serve as the Senior Director of Digital Learning Services with Cognia, formerly Advanced Ed, and Measured Progress. Over the past 19 years, I've had the privilege of working in the public school sector, along with higher education. And then I did a stint in the publication where I oversaw curriculum development for about 2,100 school districts throughout the continental United States in online learning. It is my pleasure to be here today. One of the reasons that I'm here is that we get an opportunity to work with all of our digital schools in our network with Cognia. And so I'm delighted to be here and provide some of that perspective of some of the best practices that we see within our virtual schools and how they actually promote teaching and learning. So it is my pleasure to be here. Dr. Harrington, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'm Chris Harrington. I'm the director of Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, and we're part of Michigan Virtual, which is an organization out of the state of Michigan that provides supplemental online courses for schools across the state of Michigan and even beyond, but primarily in Michigan. And we also have professional learning services and some consulting services to help schools implement their online learning programs. As part of the structure of Michigan, there is legislation that does require schools to provide online learning opportunities for students as part of graduation requirements. Our organization was kind of not born out of that legislation, but we certainly play a pivotal role in the success of students in the state of Michigan. And the Research Institute in particular is a part of Michigan Virtual, and we provide a lot of research around best practices for virtual learning, and we're also in the space of blended and student-centered learning. I myself have been an educator for about 30 years almost, both as a teacher and also as a central office administrator. And I have experience implementing, I'm going to say 40 to 50 online learning programs for school districts throughout Pennsylvania and through the rest of the United States as well. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Nicole?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for allowing me to join in this conversation today. My name is Nicole Reeves, and I hail from Louisiana, South Louisiana. So this is you have a whole different situation, except when it comes to education. We are all in the same boat. I'm currently a doctoral student, candidate, actually, and I have 26 years of experience, 24 years in the classroom and in the schools, and then now I'm going on my 5th year with Cognia. And as a director with Professional and Improvement Services in Cognia, our role is to facilitate and partner with schools and leaders and help them to develop their staff professionally and to problem solve in coaching and consulting in any way, shape, or form that they may need. With our goal, of course, always being the focus on teaching and learning. Multiple experiences have brought me to understand education from a variety of lenses. As a special education teacher, early childhood, early elementary, middle school, curriculum coordinator. It's just been really interesting to see how schools operate across the country and working with them now for the last 5 years in trying to solve problems. And so I really look forward to hearing what Dr. Harrington has to say. Of course, I've listened to multiple conversations and presentations from Dan. And so we hope that what we offer you today is enlightening and helpful and motivating, because I do appreciate and understand that this is a difficult task for many people, and I admire the work that all of you are doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole. Truly appreciate that. And so we're going to kind of get started with these questions here. There are some guiding questions for this conversation. And I think we'll kind of take turns to kind of provide different perspectives here. So Chris, if you don't mind, I'm going to get started with the first one and have you kind of chime in there. So can you explain what is virtual learning and what does it look like in practice? I think we always want to kind of start out with that foundational piece and definition piece of what is virtual learning, right? And so we'd love to hear it from your perspective, sir.
Sure, sure. So virtual learning, often called online learning, is really about students. It's an educational format. It's a learning format where students are learning away from a brick and mortar school, a physical school building, and oftentimes they're learning through technology, digital content, through maybe a learning management system or a learning platform, and their teacher is in a physically different location, maybe in the same town, maybe in the same state, could be in a different country. But virtual learning is really students experiencing or interacting with content and the teacher from a remote location. Yeah, now it can look a lot of different ways too, in practice in schools. So a lot of schools, when we think about online or virtual learning, we think about, oh, it's a fully online course and it's asynchronous, where students really don't have any real-time communications with teachers. And to a large extent, that's how a lot of virtual courses are in the K-12 space right now. However, there are also, there's a model where virtual courses do have a synchronous component, or a real-time communication where teachers and students are communicating through either chat messages, so it's real-time, or through video conferencing. So that's a very common modality. But then there's also blended learning, which is face-to-face experiences coupled with some virtual experiences. So maybe not the entire course being virtual or fully online, but it's the virtual piece is a component. And certainly the how it actually looks in the classroom will vary depending on the level. So for example, how students are working within a virtual learning environment at the high school level, say an 11th grader or a 12th grader, looks and feels a lot different than what a kindergartner or a first grader might experience.
Wonderful. And I think we're going to get to some of those questions and hopefully do a deeper dive into those questions there. Nicole, anything you want to chime in there to add?
No, I do want to say that what I am seeing here in the South and working with some of the schools, actually we work of course across the country, and being with several of the schools who've had to pivot and make this transition to a virtual learning situation, I'm noticing too that the varied components of their options for virtual learning are as varied as the teachers in the United States. Some of them are choosing to do regular school, but just online, and trying to maybe have those first 10 minutes of meeting the teacher when they normally would. I don't know if that's going to work, but these are some of the things that I'm seeing. Some of them, of course, as Dr. Harrington said, using direct instruction, whether synchronous or asynchronous. Some of them are providing times to meet throughout the week with differentiated menus for both the students and the parents. And that's going to be a component that I'd like to talk about later, because parents are having to support the learning in that environment. And just like Dr. Harrington said, probably less so for the juniors and seniors and more so for your first, second graders and kindergartners. I have even heard of some kindergartners who are doing up to 4 hours a day. So this is going to be interesting. The schools are trying to figure it out, and it depends on their populations. So it's looking different in my experience with schools across the country.
Thank you very much, Nicole, there. And I think we might actually pick up on that quick conversation there, but I just wanted to add sort of my 2 cents in there. And I think that's going to be critical as we pivot back and going into the in-person experience and that of the virtual experience. And I think that's one of the key definitions that we all are experiencing out there. I think it's vital for us to be at a baseline of what it means to be asynchronous versus synchronous learning. And then I think that has to deal with more or less the time concept, as Dr. Harrington referred to earlier, to where is it time, real time, in which we all meet at the same time. For example, this particular webinar here, or this panel, we're all here in that same synchronous time, as opposed to asynchronous, which is done or not necessarily in real time, but I would say more or less in elapsed times, right? So that it's a la carte menu. You can kind of choose at your own pace, so to speak. It's that self-paced model. And then one of the things that is being definitely thrown out there is also the teacher-led component, right? It's really about how much hours we're going to actually put in to having the teacher provide that direct instruction. And so with that, I'm going to jump into question 4 there. I know I'm going a little out of order here, but I think it was a very organic conversation there. So how many hours do students spend online each day and each week? What would be sort of the recommendation there? Dr. Harrington, I'm going to turn to you first there on that one.
Sure. And so I'm going to speak to, I can speak in 2 different ways here. One way in a non-COVID-19 emergency teaching and learning situation, where it's like a very well-established and architected virtual course. It really does vary how much time a student will spend. It really depends on the course requirements. So if there are like a full credit course is going to be a little bit more, it's going to be a longer time requirement than say a half a credit course. And there's a lot of variables that also will drive how much time a child is online in a virtual course. So some students, this is a great learning format for them, and they really take to online learning and they're very successful with it. Some students struggle. And if the course is designed in such a way that it's really heavily text-based, for example, it doesn't have a lot of interactivity to it, we see students who aren't strong readers, they tend to struggle more and they need more support, and they may need to revisit content, spend more time with it. There are some kids who will just jump right into a course and they will just work for hours and hours and hours, and even on a weekend, and really plow through it and still do a good job. If it's a good course, you know, there's a lot of learning to be had. If a course is actually spaced or paced out, where students are throttled and they're not self-directed, and it's a lot of it's teacher-led, and there's some traditional aspects like homework and pieces like that, you know, I think you can expect probably 3 to 6 hours per day. That's, I would say most kids, my own kids were online learners and they graduated from online schools. They would spend about 3 hours per day. They did school really well. They were sharp kids, and they were disciplined, and they were able to move through their work pretty well. Plus mom and dad were at home to provide some support too. So they didn't have a lot of stumbling blocks along the way. In courses that might not be designed very well, it might be harder for kids because there's this cognitive load to just trying to understand where are things in my course. And if it's a new experience for them, it generally takes them a little bit longer.
Nicole, I'm gonna.
Sure. Well, and there are, it does depend on the learner, and it depends on the setting, and it depends on the curriculum. So all of those, how much hours are spent online also varies in what do we mean by spending it online? Is it spending it online in front of a teacher or in a watching a course, or is it online actually completing the work? So, you know, you can get into the semantics there, but it should be developmentally appropriate, and it should be in line with what the students need. But there are some guidelines. For example, the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards does suggest that early elementary students should be somewhere around 1 and 2 hours a day with online instruction. Middle school students 2 to 3 hours, and then high school students 3 to 4 hours. However, one of the things that we know is the attention span, whether you're in person or virtual, is very limited, and it also varies by student. But you want to, even in a virtual situation, make sure that you teach or do some of your instruction very briefly before you have the students engage in some type of activity, which would help what Dr. Harrington said. It can't just be very text heavy. It has to be somehow, some way engaging, particularly for those with special needs or some needs for modification and adjustments. So it depends on the population. The hard part is many schools are trying to fit their normal or their in-person model to the virtual model. And there's going to be some struggles there because it is different. But those are the suggestions from the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards. And then I think that provides a good guideline, and then they can go from there.
Fantastic. And I always give a sort of an adult example here that, you know, as much as we are now working in that virtual space, I believe that we've coined this Zoom fatigue out there, right? That as much as we as adults, we have trouble staying on for meetings, you know, that are back to back to back for like 6 or 8 hours long. Just imagine the young ones who their attention span needs to be really stimulated with really interactivities and perhaps those breaks being built in as well too. So fantastic there. And I see that one of our questions actually deals with special needs. And so we're gonna maybe jump into question 5 here. And I believe that that's something that Nicole, you just referenced. So I'm gonna actually let you kind of take over there. What are some of the critical steps for schools, teachers, and parents to pivot into the virtual learning environment? In other words, what does the onboarding process look like? What does the professional development look like? So can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. What I'd like to say first, that the most critical part, when we were all faced with this in the spring, it was crisis reactionary work. But over the summer, we have worked quite a bit with several schools and leaders to prepare for a virtual re-entry, and it is much more intentional. But the most critical piece is that somehow, some way, school leaders and teachers help the students and parents have a growth mindset, a mindset that says this is possible and this is capable, and they are capable of getting this done. So now, once that mindset is established, they can be more intentional on how to onboard parents and students. The teachers have probably already been working to develop and design, and in my experience for this summer, really rethink how they're going to assess and progress monitor so they can give some more immediate feedback. It's easier when you're in person. So the onboarding for teachers is going to look different than for the family. So for the school personnel, the work that has to be done is they have to make sure that the resources that they're making available to all of the families are equitable, because every family is going to have different internet needs, different technology needs, and different levels of understanding about how the technology works. So for schools to do that, that requires a lot of back-end work. They have to look at the technology access for all of their school students and their families. Do those students have a safe physical space for learning, a set-aside space for learning? I know several families in my personal life who have 6 to 10 children, and they are all of school age, so that's a dance for them. Also, look at what type of parental support they're going to have. These are probably things that can be gathered in surveys or maybe back to school phone calls. But if they don't know the dynamic of if the parents are at home or if the parents have a working knowledge of technology and education, they have to know the degree to the support the students are going to get. So it is that type of onboarding, that type of work and preparation before they can onboard the students and the parents to a virtual model. Then some of the things that need to happen is there probably should be some consideration for parents, particularly in managing schedules and how they're going to be communicated to and with, where they can find information about their children's classes and courses. There should be, and it should come in a variety of ways. There could be links to videos, there could be mail out resources, there could be hotlines, home support calls, and there could be if the community feels comfortable, some type of way for the parents to maybe attend face-to-face if they don't have access to that technology right away. Then for teachers, the professional development for this year is going to be critical, but it's also going to be rethought as well. I think for especially this year and maybe for the future, I know that for our team with working with teachers in professional development, that we have to rethink that this year. Gone are the days where they can go for 2-day, full-day workshops and think that they're going to be able to implement it. Most of the teachers are not going to want to leave their classroom. They need some real-time skills, short chunks of information that they can apply and work with. One of the things that I am so grateful for, and the timing was spot on, Cognia partnered with Link Spring, for example, and Link offers just that type of model, although we are creating some kind of live virtual models for our teachers in our schools. But in Link Spring, it does give a menu for teachers. If it's connecting with students in a remote learning environment, being a Google Classroom teacher, start using some slide decks, or how to communicate with parents. There's short, brief, applicable professional learning for teachers that they can access when they are ready. And then there's a whole built-in component that not only do they get, just like they would do for their students, a short, brief presentation, but then they get an assignment to try it out in their classroom, and then they can come back and collaborate in some way, shape, or form. But I think for this year, professional learning is going to have to be rethought. Teachers are going to need lots of support. That means they're going to also need quite a bit of time to collaborate and communicate and talk about what works and what doesn't work, and use those smaller chunks. In terms of the students, it's going to depend on the age of the students. But no matter what the model is, or how long the schools are expecting the students to be in that virtual environment, the communication is critical now more than ever. The expectations for each student and each grade level need to be made clear. And also, if there is any misunderstanding, they can even do some type of check-ins just throughout the quarters of the school. But those expectations need to come from the teachers, from the school, to both the parents and the students. And there's lots of ways to get that done. But if their expectations are clearly communicated, and how the onboarding process is going to go in a multiple or a variety of ways of mediums to get to those parents and the students, then the chances for success are going to be greater.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nicole there. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. I would love to hear your perspective on some of the offerings there with Michigan Virtual, and how you implement the onboarding process, and what does some of the professional development that you mentioned earlier takes place in the online space.
Sure. Well, first, Nicole, that was an amazing answer. I concur with everything that Nicole said. A couple pieces I'll expand upon, but specifically with Michigan Virtual, when we onboard a school district to take some course where there's going to be students taking our courses, one of the things that we do is we first establish a mentor. So in the state of Michigan, it's required that all students are assigned a mentor, an adult mentor from the school district, to support that student in their work. So it would be a school employee. And one of the things that we do is we onboard mentors, and we give them support and provide training through learning communities, some courses, workshops, webinars on how to support kids and how to support families. And that's a really, really important piece. And Nicole mentioned something about communication and the importance of that. I'd like to underscore that. That is absolutely important, and communication looks and feels differently in an online or a virtual world. So specific attention needs to be given to that. And honestly, professional development should be focused to a certain degree on communication, because we can't assume that everybody knows how to communicate effectively in a virtual environment. And especially in a situation where you might be new to the environment, or if a pandemic pushed you into virtual teaching unexpectedly or rapidly, it's like I said, it's a very different world. So professional development is going to be really critical there. And I would argue also that professional development as it relates to how teachers can develop relationships with kids and families through the virtual modality there. So that's really important. I'm going to touch on another thing, something that that at Michigan Virtual, the things that we provide is we provide guidance to mentors on some wraparound supports, and this is really important. There are, when a school district implements an online program and they're going to start offering online courses, there are so many behind the scenes pieces that make a program successful. First of all, good courses and good professional development around instructional design if a school's building the courses, but then also how to teach in that environment. But all the other kinds of supports around social emotional needs, special education supports, English language learners and remediation enrichment opportunities, these are all pieces that now look a little different or could feel a little different in a virtual environment. So specific attention needs to be given to that. And I'm going to say another piece to this that we don't talk about a lot, or I don't hear it talked about a lot. It's the actual leadership of the school or district and the supervision process of teachers. Helping teachers grow. Nicole mentioned about teachers collaborating and getting together and share best practices. Especially if you're new to this, or you're pushed into emergency remote teaching and learning, having that kind of collaboration is so valuable. It's learning how to teach in an online environment is a long play. It's not something, as Nicole mentioned, that you can just have 2 days worth of workshops and expect to be successful. This is something that's ongoing. So having that leadership support, embedding and wrapping in, say, teacher supervision, the growth of teachers into that process, I think can do wonders for the quality of a program and ultimately for the benefit of kids.
Thank you, Dr. Harrington. And in that regards, I want to just touch base there that it sounds like right now you're really differentiating for us some of the differences and similarities of what we in the online space call the bricks and mortar, right? We'll affectionately refer to as the in-person schools and that of the digital environment, right? And so I think you've kind of touched base on some of the differences there. And I'm really glad you mentioned about the concept of leadership there. Nicole, if you don't mind, I would love to hear a little bit about the continuous improvement process that we kind of talk about at Cognia, and really how that's a really differentiator, I think, out there in both the online and in that of the in-person schools, and some of our performance standards that really guide to it. And then Chris, I'm going to turn it back to you because I know that the VLLA also has a set of standards that they're out there as well to guide some of our work there. So Nicole, would you be able to take over on that?
Sure. In our continuous improvement model, of course, we offer or present several standards within 3 domains: the leadership domain, the leadership capacity domain, the learning capacity domain, and the resource capacity domain. And never have those 3 domains been so critical as where we are right now. And of course, everything stems from the leadership. The leadership sets the stage for how things are going to play out, for the culture of the school, and for the mindset that everyone has. The hard part for the leaders is if they are new to their role or new to that area, the first trick is to understand and learn who the community is, what their needs are, and I'm talking about the school community. Learn what their needs are, and then engage in a type of shared leadership model where the teachers and the leaders can work together to problem solve, that it can't just be the vision and mission of the leader. It's the vision and mission of the school community, including the parents, the students, and the teachers. So when you experience such a situation as many of these schools have, the schools with a high quality culture, now I'm not even talking about their demographic population or geographic location. I am simply talking about the school culture from within. The ones who had a positive school culture were able to react effectively and to intentionally plan for the comeback. So it's been a little bit more difficult for those who are experiencing either a high turnover rate, because several teachers, honestly, in our area have retired. There have been schools where over half of the staff have retired because they don't want to deal with this virtual situation. So the leadership, our continuous improvement process builds into place not only those standards, but for example, when schools are creating their strategic plans, we have been working with several states who have adopted this plan. That one of the things that used to happen is school improvement plans would be created for 3 to 5 years, and all of the plans would be laid out, and then life happens. And so what ends up happening is year 2, 3, 4, and 5 never get to get their goals met because year 1 didn't work the way they planned. Well, in this model, you can still have, in our model of continuous improvement, you can still establish those long-term goals. That probably won't change whether you're in a brick and mortar school or virtual, but how you get there can change. And so what you try in the first year needs to be evaluated with measurable data. Long gone are the days where you can say, oh, it worked, everyone's happy. Well, how do you know it worked? What evidence or what data do you have? And the leadership needs to participate in that and get some verifiable and quantifiable data so that in year 2, the priorities can be readjusted. So for those schools who were engaging in that type of continuous improvement process, they always are thinking of the future, but they're taking care of business for today. And thinking about the possibilities of what might happen, what might come down the pipeline. I don't think anybody was prepared for COVID, but I know that in several states around this country and around the world, you do have to plan for natural disaster. So at any time you can be in a virtual setting. So it's something that probably should be on everyone's radar in their continuous improvement plans. The what if. If this is coming down the pipeline, how will we react or be prepared to act? So leadership, and I do want to say one thing about leadership when it comes to professional learning. Professional learning cannot be assigned by the leadership and not be participated in by them. They have to be with those teachers, learning what the teachers are learning so that they can be the support. If they're not there, then there's no way that they can help them through the struggles they have. They have to remember from where they came and walk that walk with them. So that's a little bit about the continuous improvement process. Of course, it's a lot more convoluted than that, but once teachers engage, once schools engage in the process, then it becomes just embedded into the school culture.
So we're seeing a lot of similarities and differences between the in-person schools or the bricks and mortar and that of the virtual. And so, Chris, I would love to turn it over to you. And you did mention about leadership. So I would love to hear your perspective on that, sir.
Sure. Yeah, leadership is essential, as Nicole just mentioned. So I served as the director of some virtual programs, some programs that were created by traditional brick and mortar school districts that wanted an online academy, if you will. And one of the things that I've learned is that if you don't have department chairs and supervisors and administrators growing along with the teachers, as Nicole stated, those teachers end up on an island and they don't have, they're kind of stifled. They don't have room to grow. They don't have somebody helping them stretch and get better and better in the practice in a virtual environment. And that's really, really important. If you want your program to continuously grow, everybody has to be on board with that. And it has to be institutionalized in your entire organization. It's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's a hard thing for building administrators right now, just to be able to be the instructional leader in their physical school buildings, because they're managers of facilities and resources and conflicts and things like that. To actually grow teachers is a challenge. And now, if you move to a virtual environment, even if you prepare for it, it's difficult. When you're pushed into it, like we experienced in the spring, we don't know where to go with that. And it's really difficult. So the teachers are looking for guidance, and the principals don't have necessarily all the information, knowledge, and skills to be able to support the teachers. And I think that's where we saw a lot of the pain points. Now, leadership, on the other hand, in a proactive way, and you know, we did have a little bit of time this summer to prepare for some scenarios, right? Could be fully virtual, could be a hybrid where some students attend face-to-face in a socially distanced way. You know, so we did have some time to plan there. I would argue it's not enough time still, but at least there's some opportunities there. And I myself have worked hand in hand with some schools to actually help them develop their plans to do that. But it is all around, how do you create high quality virtual learning experiences? Because sooner or later, it's very likely that everyone's going to get pushed to virtual again in the fall. You know, whether we want it or not, it's a distinct possibility.
Well, that leads us to the next question there, Chris. Thank you very much for that answer. So if we are going to have to pivot and potentially prepare for this online, can you share with us some of the best practices in virtual learning, and perhaps what are some key insights? You mentioned earlier about the onboarding and making sure that there's an adult advocate, right? And I think that I'm getting a little bit into this, the final question there as well too, with parents and teachers there, is that that model of guidance and having that adult advocate now is almost shifting a little bit to that of the parents that are at home, right? And then some of the most effective schools, virtual schools out there, I've seen, they've kind of coined the term sort of like coaches, like learning coaches, right? To where they provide and help the teachers and also the parents to become sort of some of the learning coaches. And so if you don't mind, we would like to hear your perspective on that there, Chris, and touch on that.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that was, you know, this past spring was certainly a surprise to parents as well, right? Realizing what actually happens in a school day and how to educate your child and keep your child engaged, right? It's a tricky thing in a virtual world. I think, you know, for sure in a virtual course and for virtual learning, technology is not the focus. We know that. It's really instruction, and it's the relationship between the students and the teachers, and the parents factor into that as well. But technology is definitely a prerequisite to really unleashing the power of virtual learning. So making sure that infrastructure, both at the school and at the home, are robust and reliable. And I'm talking about devices for students. Nicole talked about the equity piece a little bit. So it's the devices, it's the internet bandwidth, it's the digital content and quality digital content. There's a misconception when it comes to if I want to become an online teacher and I want to start teaching virtually, I can just take my face-to-face practices that I had and I can just digitize them and move them online. We've learned that doesn't work, right? I mean, we see it all across the country. Teachers become less effective, and part of the challenge then is like, oh well, virtual learning, it's not as good as face-to-face learning. Yeah, it can be. You know, it's possible that a student never steps foot in a physical building. They can enroll in kindergarten and go all the way through to their doctorate without actually getting stepping in a physical building, right? It's really about how the instruction, how the courses are architected, the instructional design. The learning, and this does go to the professional development piece around pedagogy. The big challenge schools face right now in online learning is student engagement. We learned it very clearly in the spring, but even schools that have been engaged or provided online virtual offerings for kids, they still struggle with student engagement and how you design your curriculum, how you're communicating with kids, those expectations, setting those, and developing the relationships. That's what's going to keep kids engaged. That's a best practice that I think should be at the top of the list. Communication goes hand in hand with this, of course. And Nicole said this very well earlier with the about the teachers and teachers growing together and collaborating. That is how you get long-term sustainability and building capacity within your organization. Collaboration. We all learn together. And guess what? The administrators learn alongside with the teachers.
Wonderful. Thank you very much there, Chris. Nicole?
I do want to stress what Chris was saying just a second ago. Student engagement is and always has been probably the #1 connector for students to learning. And the thing about that is you're not going to have any engagement if you haven't first built a relationship. So what's different about virtual learning is how are the teachers going to do several things? Establish a relationship with the students, have the students develop a relationship with each other and a relationship to the content. And all of those have to be vital, good quality relationships. So even if you're not in person, the technology piece, yes, is critical, but the engagement is even more so. And to engage them, they need a safe environment that may not be a physical room. It's the virtual classroom, whatever that is, because students have to feel safe with each other, especially if the students are collaborating in any of the online learning activities. That relationship building. So strategies need to be developed, probably, in my opinion, first and foremost, to establish those relationships. And if they can do that in the beginning of the school year and make sure that the students know that they are good, because here's the other thing, the students are probably afraid. They have missed out. They are coming back at different ability levels. The teachers are worried about their ability to teach, or do I look like the expert? Well, even if they don't, that's okay, because if you have a safe environment, wherever your fears or your pain points are, those quality relationships will help them to get through whatever they're facing. So the teachers, the best practices, they have to learn and explore different ways of engaging the students through an online platform. So they're going to have to really, and they're not going to be able to get to it all. There's so many options. That's why collaboration is important. Then they have to use those multiple strategies to develop the relationships and interactions between them and the students and each other. There needs to be a way for them to make the course meaningful. So whatever the model looks like, if it's not in person and the students can't see and touch and use manipulatives for early learning students, how can they make it meaningful and make it make sense to them? Because the teachers are also going to have to change the way they progress monitor. Students need immediate feedback, and they need quality feedback that helps the student to adjust or redirect their learning if they're not getting it correctly. Well, how do you do that in a virtual environment? So the teachers have to think about how they're going to observe student learning, how they're going to give feedback. They need to take time. The teachers need to take time to reflect on their own practices, and they need the students to be able to reflect on theirs. When we start helping each other become more reflective in what happens, then we all have the opportunity to grow. Of course, the assessment piece is one of the pain points for several of the teachers with whom we're working. How do you assess in an online or a virtual learning situation and have it be fair and no cheating and online and so on and so forth? But that also begs the question, are you conducting any kind of formative assessments? Do you have questions that form their thinking? And can they demonstrate that in some way that may not be a paper pencil test? But that building of community in all of those ways, with non-content conversation, sharing successes after those reflections, sharing the challenges and the experiences, I do think that we might be able to, in a way, I want to say I'm not thankful for COVID, but I'm thankful that it's stretching our thought and the way we approach things, because learning can be so much more engaging when we teach students how to think and not just what content standards need to be checked off. It's that, but the other piece that I haven't considered is how do they manage student behaviors online? That's another piece. Classroom management in a virtual setting is very different, than a traditional setting. But I do think that there are some, well, that might be getting into your next question, so I'll wait, because I think there's some best practices for students and parents as well. I'll share them now unless you want me to wait.
Chris, was there anything you wanted to add? We are running a little bit short on time here, so what a wonderful conversation. You guys have been phenomenal. Thank you very much for all of your insight and expertise there. I think I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and then Nicole, if you don't mind, at the end here, I think one of the things that we want to make sure is that talk about some of the resources that we can provide for our audience out there, and what are some of the professional development opportunities, whether it's from the high school down to the middle schools, down to the elementary, and same thing goes for Michigan Virtual there. Chris, if you can touch on that a little bit as well too.
Sure. So there's so much to talk about, no doubt. I think one of the things that I worry about a little bit is I worry about the perception people have and are forming of virtual learning because of the experiences in the spring. And what we experienced in the spring, I don't think you can really consider to be virtual learning. I think there have been some attempts, and schools have been trying their best, but in a true quality virtual learning program, a lot of those challenges that we experienced in the spring don't really occur. So I think while there are lessons learned from the spring, and schools are going to be moving into the fall, ready or not, I think the takeaway here is this is a long play, as I mentioned before, and I think the conversations that are started now need to sustain, because one of the things that we have seen from a research perspective is those schools who were already established with virtual learning or student-centered learning fared much better in their transition to the remote learning that we were all pushed into back in the spring. So yeah, at Michigan Virtual, michiganvirtual.org is our website. We have a whole section on our website that's around learning continuity. There were some spur of the moment webinars, documents, guidance for schools on how to make a transition. They're still very relevant now, and schools still have some time before the kids show up on the front door, so to speak. And so by all means, feel free to reach out to me again. I'm easy to find on the website, but I can share all kinds of resources with you to do that. But Michigan Virtual, we have a lot of free resources. We have guides for students, parents, administrators, teachers, school boards, and it's all rooted in research.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Nicole?
Yes, we did the same thing, Chris. We created a COVID, when you go to our website at cognia.org, we have a resources page. And at the time in the spring, which is still up, we had some tips and tricks to help school leaders, and we have what every state is doing. So if you go to our website, we have several webinars, we have conversations, we have just like this here recorded. There are student panels. I think there were maybe a parent panel. Then we also talk about tools and resources we have. Well, that COVID resources page is in addition to what we had in the spring, which are many of those webinars and interviews are still pertinent now, but we also have this whole return to school package where there's just, and they're all free. They're just to help people wrap their heads around this reality and do the best that they can moving forward. So that's at cognia.org.
You got muted there, Nicole.
I did, I realized.
Okay.
Within the organization, we are creating even more because we realize the need for smaller chunks of professional learning. But we have on our website, you can see all of the options that we have for professional learning, and we're going to grow that even more because we want to have a space for teachers to be able to collaborate, a space for some like little mini boot camps, a space for those types of things. They're all in development, but there will be, everything we will offer will be added to this, to our website. Of course, you can see about our trusted partners too. So if people are members, they can look at the information from LinkSpring, which are those little chunks for teachers and resources for teachers. But even if they're not members, I think they can still access LinkSpring and other opportunities there as well. So.
Fantastic. And we will get together with the University of Albany here and make sure that some of our resources, which are free and available on our website, gets to the site previously mentioned by Dr. Rivera. A lot of it is going to be, as Chris mentioned, research-based best practices. We also have been able to incorporate all the lessons that we learned and picked up from really ultimately the best practices of digital schools and what makes them effective, right? And so there's even a checklist that we said, hey, these are the 5 things that we see that are vital and crucial for digital schools and virtual schools to operate and be effective. And so you can actually check those resources out, and we'll make sure that it gets to Albany as well. And so with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really insightful conversation. Chris, I want to thank you for coming and joining us and really providing that perspective. Nicole, it's been a pleasure, as always, working with you. And so please reach out to us. Again, of course, we'll do some plugs there. Connect with us at cognia.org, michiganvirtual.org as well too. And then of course, join us for the next sessions here with the Academy for Advancement there, teaching leadership and schools. Dr. Rivera or Dr. Lane, anything you want to add to there before we wrap things up here? Thank you very much for the opportunity today to be part of this.
As I suspected, bravo to all of you. It was wonderful what you shared. There is so much more to discuss. And as I mentioned to you all earlier, we may have to bring you back so we can get into the nitty gritty. But I think we needed to start here to have a conversation about the big picture before we could actually get into what exactly should an appropriate elementary class online look like? What should it include? What are the best practices? What is research saying? And so I think that before we can actually have those conversations, I think this set the stage for that. So I welcome the opportunity to have you back. And I'll be reaching out to you in the near future. The resources that you mentioned, we will make them available on remoteed.org. That is a site that was established by the School of Education in light of the pandemic. Currently, there are 1,500 free resources for parents, teachers, and leaders in schools. So please tune there, as well as visit directly Cognia and Michigan Virtual. So thank you again for your time today, and I look forward to our continued relationship. And I thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Community Conversations. Good night.